Hello, welcome to Experience xAPI. So this is actually based on a workshop that I ran in IEEE where I talked about how you can use xAPI to reveal a bunch of learners' experiences. And I did a recording of it, but I couldn't really hear myself, so I decided to just re-record myself doing the talk inside here for anyone that was wanting to review or wanting to learn about xAPI. So the goal here is that I want to talk about what is xAPI, see it in action, and also talk a little bit about the technicalities so we understand what's going under the hood. So let's get started with it. So the first thing I want to talk about is like how I got into xAPI. Right? I got into xAPI because of this field called learning engineering, which I'll probably talk about in the next upcoming videos. But the idea is essentially this process where we're practicing these learned science by using human-centered engineering design methodologies and using data-informed decisions to support our learners. And so you'll see that there's this big emphasis around data-informed decisions, right? The thing is that anytime you're trying to solve any type of problem in any type of field, you're kind of placed in this black box and you're trying to figure out which path to go. And so when you're in a black box, well, there's only two things you can really do. You could either guess or you make assumptions, but those two things don't really get you too far. And so this is where data becomes really important because data acts like a flashlight for us. You know, given that you flash it the correct way, or I guess in this context, if you're able to effectively collect your data and analyze it, well, you start to actually see which path is actually ineffective. And in a lot of ways, if you're able to collect the right information and you're able to analyze it, well, then you start to see that there's also opportunities as well. And so this naturally brings us to the cycle of the learning engineering process, where we actually start to see that what happens is that we start to understand what exactly is our learners' pain points. But throughout the entire cycle, you start to see data is very involved in that process. We start to talk to ourselves like, what data do we need to collect to make sure that we're being effective? And are we actually collecting the necessary data? And once we do have that information, well, how can we take that information to our next iteration to improving our learning solution? And so we understand that data is super important, but what standards are out there to track our learners? And the one that's most commonly known for is actually good old SCORM. SCORM's been with us for 20 plus years. It's a extremely reliable standard that's universally accepted. And so for those of you guys who don't know what SCORM is, it's basically a way for e-learning courses to communicate with learning management systems. And what that allows is like now we can basically get some data about how our learners are doing on the courses that they're taking. We can get information like how are they completing the courses, how are they doing on their assessments, and even small things like how long are they taking in each of these modules. All of these are very valuable information, but the problem is that they're only confined in a learning management system. And learning just does not only happen in learning management systems, learning happens everywhere. And so the way I like to think of it is like basically like a Clues board game, right? If you think about it, you know, if you didn't ever play Clue before, the idea is that you have to go to these different types of rooms and collect evidence to understand who exactly your murderer is. And it's not very so different for us for learning engineers. Like we're also trying to solve a mystery. We're trying to understand if our learners, you know, what they currently know and what do they like, what do they not like, what's effective for them, what's ineffective for them. And so really a learning management system is kind of like one of those rooms. You know, still very valuable, but very limited in terms of knowledge. But these other players, well, they go to things like social platform, VR trainings, discussion forums, CRM sales trainings, online courses, webinars, digital libraries, and networking events. These are all things that they do outside of the learning management system. And so we call each of these different types of rooms, and this is the first terminology, we call them learning record providers. And a learning record provider is basically any tool or technology that's inside your environment that can provide ideas or insights to what exactly your learners are doing. So in these contexts of social platform, online courses, VR trainings, and CRM sales trainings, well, as of now, they're really just disconnected pieces of a puzzle. If you want to see a practical example, like Yammer, Scenario VR, or Udemy or Salesforce, like this could be some applications that your user uses or your learner uses if they're trying to onboard them in training to your company. And so yes, each of your employees are using each of these applications, but they only communicate among themselves. It'd be nice if we could actually have all of these put together to really talk about the topic as a whole, like how actually is the onboarding process for your employees. So the question we're trying to answer is like, how can we like fit this all together and not make them like silos? And the answer to that is where xAPI comes in. xAPI is essentially the specification that allows you to track a variety of different types of learning experiences. And so I'll talk about the technicalities later, but the idea is that we have this thing called learning record store, And because all these learning record providers are able to have the same language and structure and they can communicate with each other, well, all we do is we send all that information to our learning record store. And basically, this allows us to aggregate our information from the centralized place and to analyze it. And that's the benefits that xAPI provides. xAPI, just like SCORM, is not a technology, but rather a standard that provides us rules and guidelines of how these different learning record providers should communicate with each other. And so let's actually see this in action, right? So as of now, what I have over here is different types of applications, right? I will go back. What? That's weird. And I'll refresh this as well too. Right, so I kind of played around with this, right? But the idea is that you can imagine these things as different types of applications, from the emotions, surveys, the quizzes, the videos, the chat box, and the workshop connectivity activity. I'm going to link all of these codes to the bottom so you can actually see the implementation. But the basic idea is that like all these things are different apps, and if I were to basically, answer any of them, you can see like the information is going to change inside there. If I were to actually click on maybe external API, you're going to see that this is going to pop up as well too. Let's just go here and I say, hey, my name is John or something, and I click send. Well, then you're going to see that we also get to have information about the most active chat participants. So, I mean, you can't really see much value right now because it's only one person doing this. But if you have a lot of people that are using these different apps and sending information, which is what happened in the workshop, well, then you get to really get a nice complete picture of how engaged the learners are and how are they doing and which places are they actually struggling in. So xAPI allows you to track a variety of different things that they're experiencing and centralizing it to this one page of analytics. And so going back to this, how does this actually all work at the end of the day? So as we mentioned right here, these are just different applications that basically contribute to this analytics that we can see all together. And the way how it works, well, let's first talk about what does xAPI stand for. X, as you guys probably infer, means experience, and API is basically a way for two or more applications to communicate with each other. In the context of learning engineering and xAPI, we call these things learning record providers. And so you start to see that xAPI is really just a communication standard. And like with any type of communication standards, you're going to need to have some rules and guidelines. And so that's where the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative comes into place. They're the ones that essentially sets the rules for the communication. They set the rules and guidelines for how these different learning record providers should communicate with each other. So we already know about one part about xAPI, right? These are the components of it. We know about learning record provider, which is the thing that's going to provide us information of what exactly our learners are doing. But immediately when you click that submit connection or that button to submit the information, it sends over something called an activity statement, which is very English-like gauge connected with workshop connection activity. And that information is essentially being stored in a learning record store. And you can see that each of these things are individual activity statements for each of those different rows. And so these learning record providers, they all are sending activity statements, but they all follow that same structure, and that's why we're able to centralize it, or centrally store it inside this learning record store. And so let's first dig a little bit to the activity statement. Really, an activity statement at the end of the day is just really JSON structured data about learning experience. And if you don't know what JSON is, it's basically just a way to format your data. So there's 3 requirements as a minimum to be considered an activity statement. You need to have an actor, which in this case is John. And then you need to have a verb, which is the action taken by the actor, which is finish. And then finally, we have the object, which is the target of the action. And so you can see that John has finished the mountain biking adventure. And so technically, this is basically enough to be considered an activity statement. But the thing about xAPI's value is that not only are you able to receive information from a variety of different sources, but also you can get a lot more granular of the information of that learner. So I can also add properties like results, like did they complete it successfully, and at that time of completion, what was their average speed? I could even have a property of context, which provides some more insights to how, or at that time the learner submitted this, what was their environments? It just provides a lot more meaning to the statement. And then finally, we take that statement and we store it in something called a learning record store. And a learning record store is essentially the soul of the xAPI ecosystem. It's basically where we collect, store, and retrieve xAPI statements. So you can see over here that if I were to click on one of these different boxes, you'll see that this looks like exactly like the activity statement that I showed you in the last slide. So basically that's where the information is being stored at. So really what my app was doing was that I had my coded app. I was setting the activity statements, and that was stored in a learning record store in a very structured way. And because they were all structured, like all the learning record providers had a structure to how they communicated, well, it was very simple for me to just aggregate all that together into one page of information to analyze the learners from a whole. But some of the things that people are curious about is like, okay, do I actually need to know JavaScript in order to use xAPI? And the answer to that is no. You don't need to know how to do programming to start with xAPI. But if you are a coder, well, keep in mind that this is JSON data, so you could technically use any programming language. And I did want to actually show you this code because I want to show you that it's actually not that bad. Because if you look at it carefully, where it says actor, verb, object, results, and context, this follows the same exact structure as an activity statement, and all I'm doing is actually adding an extra line to send that xAPI statement, like so. But I understand that a lot of these people watching this tutorial might also be instructional designers as well too, right? And you don't want to work with programming, you don't want to mess with JSON data, I completely understand. Keep in mind that xAPI at the end of the day is a standard. So we have a lot of people that are trying to comply to xAPI and adopting it. So these things you can imagine are essentially like your learning record providers, which you can actually plug into your solution, and basically you can retrieve xAPI statements to analyze later. And then basically to store that information, you have a variety of xAPI compliant learning record stores. The one I used was Storm Cloud, but you could also use things like Watershed and Veracity Learning. What's nice about Watershed and Veracity Learning is essentially they have built-in analytics that you could already see from the xAPI statements that go into your database. And so really what your architecture could look like instead of just coding is you can use a xAPI compliant software like Scenario VR to provide like, real life, or to provide VR training that sends it over an activity statement, which in this case it sends it over to Watershed, and Watershed immediately shows you some analytics because it already has built-in analytics. So really that's what xAPI is all about, and I really want to show you guys or talk to you guys about this because I want to show that there's a lot of ways that you can collect learners' experience to get more of that complete picture. So anyway, that's all I have for now, but if you guys want to see some of the code, I'll link it at the bottom. If you want me to provide a tutorial on that, I'll be more happy to do that, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.